Earlier on this year, one of the most famous American cultural icons died, that being pro wrestler Hulk Hogan, who had a complex legacy, to say the least, which ended with him essentially going from beloved to hated. And in this video, I want to talk about the positives and negatives of Hulk Hogan / Terry Bollea. Now, I'd like to start with a positive, some of which are well documented, others aren't so much. The most obvious place to start would be his impact on the wrestling business, and bringing it to a mainstream audience permanently. Which wrestling was obviously popular, especially in certain states, selling at places like Madison Square Garden, and even back in the 30s, it was one of the country's biggest sports, with matches like Jim Landos vs Strangler Lewis attracting 35,000 people to their match in 1934, a record for many years. However, Hogan was able to get general audience, and not just one part of the country, like the Southern Territories, to attract a whole country of people, helped by his unique but incredible look.
I'm looking at the size of your arms. I don't believe this. I wish I had anything that big.
Of course, backed by a lot of steroids, which I'll get onto later on in this video. His charisma and easygoing personality, where during his promos or interviews, he brought this frantic but intriguing entry to them.
Everywhere I go, man, all the little Hulksters ask me, is there any truth to the fact that there was a controversial count? Hulkster, did you really get him over your head? Did you really beat the Giants?
And just overall, the spectacle of Hulk Hogan. A good example of this is his match against The Rock at WrestleMania 18, which is a match that isn't actually that complicated, or even that great technically, but just because of who Hulk Hogan was, the crowd goes absolutely insane for everything he did. Which leads me to Hulkamania, wherein Hogan's fame was so monumental and vital, also thanks to his appearance in Rocky III. For example, if Hogan wasn't on the show, it could lead to several thousand people not turning up. The mania in reference being to wrestler Austin Idol, who alongside superstar Billy Graham, Hogan borrowed from heavily. Idolmania being the name for how popular Austin Idol was during the early 80s and late 70s. And Hogan admitted during his Joe Rogan interview and other interviews about how much Austin Idol inspired him. Cup in his ear, he took directly from Austin Idol. And you can see the numbers Hogan did just in terms of dropping alone. Specifically on TV, wherein a match between him and Andre the Giant drew 26.64 million views and a 15.2 Nielsen rating, which meant that 15% of the household who had access to cable TV watched the match, making it still to this day the most watched match in American history. This being the first time wrestling had a major monumental boom and made the more positive impact nationally on the wrestling business. However, his second time would be possibly more important, due to it garnering more interest, that being his infamous heel turn at Bash of the Beach in 1996. Which was so against the grain, not in terms of the concept of Hogan going from bad to good, which many famous wrestlers have done this before, but Hogan seemed to not want to change ever really. However, after seeing how lucrative it could be, he did it, and due to the timing of it, led to WWF's main competitors for a year and a half becoming the biggest wrestling company in the world, outdrawing WWF the infamous 83 weeks, doing ridiculous business. For example, on July 6, 1998, on free TV, Hogan was defeated in front of 41,000 fans in the Georgia Dome. And just to prove how big wrestling was at the time, Raw actually had nearly a million more viewers who watched their broadcast that same week. Thus Hogan being a major reason alongside WWF stars for bringing millions of viewers each week to watch wrestling constantly for a several year period, which was a large part due to Hulk Hogan himself. While certainly not the first cool bad guy in wrestling, was certainly one of the most impactful and led to wrestling boom which lasted from 1996 to 2001. Watch my video up here on the death of pro wrestling. Inspiring other wrestlers, of course, another major positive is Hogan's inspiring of several other wrestlers who want to become wrestlers. From Kane to Edge to, of course, another major superstar, and Raw, John Cena. Thus, Hogan was able to inspire some of the greatest and most popular wrestlers of their era and of all time to get into the business. All because of Hogan. If Hogan didn't exist, the wrestling business would be far different from what it is today. Another positive is Hogan's charity work, which was quite extensive, such as him raising $1 million for charity in 2015, granting 200 Make-A-Wishes. He did work for diabetes, several different campaigns. He also auctioned off his custom car in order to raise funds for 50 Legs, Prosthetic Leg and Limb Foundation. And whilst yes, this can be argued that it was just he had a good look for his PR and image, I'd argue he still did it, and could have easily refused or made up an excuse to not do it. But he didn't. And there are even stories, one in particular, that show Hogan to some extent did care about the other wrestlers. For example, as told by Brian Last on the Jim Cornette Experience, that famously beloved WCW referee Brian Hildebrand / Mark Curtis, as he was also known as, who died of cancer in 1999 and was diagnosed with it in 1997, and Hogan, after hearing about this, actually talked and asked Hildebrand if he needed any help with medical bills and tried to set him up with a doctor and get treatment. Now, starting on a lighter note, I want to talk about Hogan's lies. Now, to talk about every lie Hogan has ever said would make this video about 5 hours long. I will go over some of them as they are quite funny. The most infamous one would be maybe his Metallica lie, in which Hogan said he was approached to or auditioned to play bass for Metallica, which just isn't true. Even saying he was asked
Well, I
before
got
the
him.
band was
I got
formed,
him
which of
first
course
when he
band
came back
members
from
constantly
UFC.
refute.
Okay,
Other ones, like he said on Joe
and
Rogan,
I was kind of like winding down, putting guys over.
which of course Hogan didn't get Brock Lesnar after his return, as Hogan was in an entirely different wrestling promotion. I'm also not really knowing anything about Montreal Screwjob, one of the most famous events in wrestling history.
Well, Bret Hart was supposed to lose to Shawn Michaels, I think WrestleMania, whatever the hell it was, 16 or 17, I don't know, where all the fans were yelling, Bret screwed Bret. Bret told Vince McMahon, I'm not losing to Shawn Michaels in Canada. And they went out there and Shawn Michaels pulled a fast one on Bret Hart and held him down and pinned him, and Bret couldn't do anything about it. And the so-called excellence of execution that was supposed to be the greatest wrestler of all, little teeny Shawn Michaels held him down and embarrassed him.
Claimed that Elvis was a Hulkamaniac, despite that not being a thing until post Elvis's death. One of the funniest ones is that Harley Race came to an arena Hulk was at and set the ring on fire, asking him for a job. He body slammed Andre, who only died a couple of days later. However, Andre lived a further 6 years after this. Claimed to fight Pride fighters in the 70s, around 20 years or so before Pride became a thing in 1997. Claimed he's originally supposed to be the figurehead, spokesperson for George Foreman Grills, missed the call. Claimed to work 400 days a year to go to Japan and back. And also claimed he essentially beat Inoki so bad in the ring, he died, and was only brought back thanks to CPR and was blacklisted from Japan due to the Yakuza. His infamous black eye from WrestleMania 9, which he claimed was from a jet ski accident, though most people believe what actually happened was that Randy Savage punched him. He was scouted to play for the New York Yankees and the Cincinnati Reds, however was stopped because he injured his arm. He claimed to work at SummerSlam 1992 at Wembley Stadium with Mr. T and Michael Jackson, all of which are lies due to Hogan not working for WWF at the time. Now, those are the wacky, funny, but no harm done type of lies. However, there are some others that are quite bad and had negative consequences of doing that. For example, during a match with Undertaker, he faked an injury to his neck, claiming that the Undertaker essentially dropped Hogan directly on his neck, leading to Undertaker feeling severe guilt for a few days. Thus, Hogan could have gotten Undertaker fired, despite the video clearly showing Taker was very intentionally careful with him, as to not hurt him. He has also had some, of course, harmful lies. His son Nick Hogan in August 2007 got into a car crash due to drunk driving, in which he paralysed his best friend, John Graziano, and to this day he has to have 24-hour care just to live his life. However, Hogan essentially blamed the victim and insulted him, lying to protect his son, despite his son being solely to blame, given his future DUI arrests, proving that it was his son's fault. Hogan's other most harmful lie would be his infamous Arsenio Hall appearance. Now, during the early 90s, the federal government, in order to essentially make an example of someone, went after WWF, specifically Vincent McMahon, in which they tried to indict him and basically tried to say that Vince was this sort of Gus Fring type drug supplier, dealing to his wrestlers illegal anabolic steroids. And during this trial, Hogan would appear on the Arsenio Hall show, as his case got widespread media coverage from the news, entertainment, such as the Phil Donahue Show, and of course Arsenio Hall. Now, Vince McMahon himself admitted to steroid use, however still lied somewhat, saying that he used them, however it felt unnatural, and stopped using them, which, whilst still not the whole truth, was believable. Now, Hogan was asked about steroid use on Arsenio Hall show, and before he had asked Vince what to say, which Vince told him, according to multiple reports, Vince told Hogan to tell the truth. However, Hogan didn't, instead saying,
"But the things that I am not is I'm not a steroid abuser, and I do not use steroids. But there's a situation where steroids, Hulk Hogan, and my private physicians have something all in common, and these are the situations. When I first won the world title in '83, I was wrestling almost 300 days a year. And on 2 or 3 different occasions, I got hurt in the ring.
Right.
And thank God I made the right choice. Because at the time, I had to make a decision of going into surgery, have my back, my deltoid, my bicep cut and reattached with staples, or do the sports therapy route.
Which immediately negatively impacted WWF, as well as Hogan's perception, as Hogan up to this point was mostly seen as a sort of hero figure, specifically to a younger audience. However, after straight up lying,
Steroids? Ooh, you hit me with your best shot right there. All the macho maniacs out there, I'll tell you the truth. I've experimented with anabolic steroids before. Yes, I have. And I did it when it was legal. I don't do it anymore. It's been a long time since I did it. But let me tell you something right now. It's like putting poison in your body.
it caused a negative perception on wrestling and impacted the business severely, so much so wrestling the viewership took a turn for the worse, all across the board, leading to some of the worst years in wrestling history. Now, the wrestling hardcore fans that would watch didn't really care. The performers did not look like Hulk Hogan or Randy Savage, who a large part of their appeal was their Greek godlike physique to a general audience. And thus, for several years, basically until the formation of the Outsiders and Hogan's aforementioned heel turn in WCW, wrestling indirectly suffered because of this. Though there were other factors, but this was a major factor. What makes these lies even stranger is the fact that Hogan had such a big career that he didn't really have to lie about all these things at all. So the stories that he would no doubt have were already interesting enough. Thus him lying about fighting Pride fighters or murdering Antonio Inoki in the ring all just seems so strange to lie about. Made weirder is the fact one of Hogan's best, most loyal friends, who was known to be one of the most truthful, honest people in the wrestling business, perhaps ever, that being Jimmy Hart, who even throughout the bad times would never betray Hogan, despite others backstabbing him. Jimmy to the last never did, making his appearance at the Hulk Hogan 10-bell salute even more heartbreaking. Now, Hogan had several controversies throughout his career, but perhaps the most troubling one would be his racist remarks, which, are really scathing. Hogan was removed from the Hall of Fame due to this incident, understandably, and harmed his reputation tenfold given his strange apology, in which he basically said it's okay to be a racist or a horrible person, just make sure you don't get caught. This being a direct quote from his speech. Quote, "So please be careful, because people have cell phones and cameras, so just be careful," end quote. Which comes off, just like I said, as essentially it's okay to have these thoughts, just don't get caught, which is of course very troubling given the fact WrestleMania, the original one, was sold on the spectacle Hogan and his tag team partner Mr. T, or him wrestling in WCW, which due to its geographical location of the South, had a large black fan base. He would go to shows throughout Hogan's entire reign in WCW, and of course the countless black opponents he would have had matches and programs with throughout his entire career. Thus, understandably, these comments shocked many people and left a massive mark on the overall legacy of Hulk Hogan.
That doesn't work for me, brother. You know.
Hogan is famous for him not wanting to put anybody over, really. Even when he got beat, like for example against Ultimate Warrior, as soon as the ref counted 3, he instantly kicked out. Now sometimes this could be justified, especially during the height of Hulkamania, given the fact him being a champion drew major crowds, and there are infamous matches where Hogan would screw his opponents over. 2 major examples would be Bret Hart, wherein Hogan actually got into an argument with Vince, refused to put him over, instead losing to Yokozuna, which Bret is still understandably bitter about to this day. The next time was even more damaging. Though he did lose, that being Starrcade in 1997, which would have been WCW's crowning achievement in terms of a classic feud, and perhaps could have changed the history of the company forever, as this is considered by many to be the start towards the fall of WCW. The planned match was Hogan would beat Sting via a dodgy fast count from the referee, and then it would be restarted and Hogan would be beaten clean by Sting. However, Hogan, earlier on in the day, told the referee backstage to do a normal count. Thus, when you watch it, it's very confusing, as it was just a normal count. Sting would win, however, it dampened what could have been an all-time moment due to Hogan's backstage politicking. Hogan also stopped a wrestlers' union from occurring, thus protecting himself due to how much money he was making, and also destroying a friendship he had with Jesse Ventura.
Someone to be their friend. And he's the one that ratted me to Vince when I tried to unionize. I found that out under federal deposition when Vince was put under sworn, and he didn't hesitate at all.
Which was very scummy of Hogan, and he even admitted on several interviews candidly why he did it.
Like the Jesse Ventura story that he sticks to about, I went to Vince and told him that Jesse was trying to start a union. I did that. You know, I mean, I was making crazy money. I was getting my break, and then Jesse wanted to have a union where everybody got paid the same.
Yeah.
I said, Vince, guess what Jesse's doing?
And thus stopped a wrestlers' union from happening to this day, which would have been highly beneficial, especially back in the day. Wrestlers only really now getting good paycheck on AEW and WWE, two major wrestling companies. So, what is the legacy of Hulk Hogan? Well, I think it's split into two parts. Hulk Hogan, the character, the persona, was a highly influential, a vital part of the wrestling business, and bringing it to the mainstream, inspiring hundreds of thousands of wrestlers or people just interested in it. He spread joy during his initial run and was cool during his NWA run, from the beard to the clothing to the air guitar and to his entrance. But there was also Terry Bollea, the highly flawed, self-absorbed, lying egomaniac who was a racist, backstabber, put an entire promotion into debt, money-hungry, scheming, flawed human being. To the very end, remained controversial. So whilst Terry was a very conflicted, complicated, flawed person, Hulk Hogan was an icon, staple of the entire business. So, like Eric Bischoff, very fitting tweet, thanks for the house, Hulkster.